Hello. Hi. Good timing. Happy Wednesday. How you doing, Sharkies? How is the illustrious Sharkies family today? That's right. I said illustrious. And Farmhouse. A bit weck weary. I'm gonna guess week weary, but gotta make sure you see the puppy. I'm leaning forward. Look at that pup. That pup deserves a snacko. Possibly several snacko. Oh, camera's a little high right now. Knitting yourself a toque. Very nice. You meant week. Oh, W-E-E-K. I'm a little tired. I got my third dose of the vaccine 2 days ago, day before yesterday, and then Farmhouse got her third dose today. So I was just a little sore on the day of. My arm was just a little sore. It wasn't too bad. Yesterday, I woke up very achy and groggy and blur after a bad night's sleep. And then most of the day was okay. And then the evening last night, I was very gross feeling and also kind of had to go pick up a friend from the airport. So that wasn't a fun time. But I slept very well last night and I'm feeling totally fine today. Like my arm is a little bit sore, barely even noticeable. So, as far as effects go, not too bad for me. Just one day of being out of it. Yeah, and so now I have Pfizer, Moderna. PPM. Moderna. So my first non-Pfizer shot. Hopefully that's a good thing, who knows? Somebody probably knows, not me though. But yeah, I think I am a little sleepy today. But otherwise good. Our friend Lily stopped by on Monday, I think. Today's Wednesday. Maybe it was Sunday. Maybe it was on Sunday. And dropped something off. But I am going to wait to show what that is until the next time Lily's around. Which I do not think is right now. I got a couple notifications of people following my channel, but I don't know who they are. And I don't think I've ever seen them in chat or anything, so I don't know what's up with that. They're not here now. Farmhouse says Lily was here on Saturday. Okay. Sharkies had to go for a mix vaccine, and Mr. was fine with the booster, maybe a little tired. less of a sore arm than the second shot. So you've both had your third? Yeah, I had heard at varying points that mixing them up might be a good thing. I don't know if I've ever heard otherwise, so I don't know. I'm happy to have gotten Moderna. Um, I think that um, it makes kind of sense to me that maybe if one of them has a strength that the other doesn't or something, then, this way I get all of the strengths, right? Pharma says she's heard Moderna was especially good to have for this particular variant. Yeah. As far as I am aware, I don't think I've ever actually been exposed to COVID. I think, I'm not aware of ever having come in contact, and I'm not aware of ever having had any symptoms or anything. So far, I think I've made it through COVID-free. I hope so, anyways. Sharky's always felt like the mixing them Venn diagram to the virus coverage. Yeah, exactly. So we made it through the first chapter of part 2 of Pawn of Prophecy. Chapter 12, we finished. We both work in pretty public serving sectors. Yeah, that is kind of a scary thing, I guess. Yeah, we finished chapter 12. There were sleds and shirtless men wrestling in the streets and a crazy old witch lady who Barak was not very happy about. Martier. Yeah, we had instances where there was a possibility that somebody that we had been in contact with had maybe been in contact with, but as far as we're aware, we have not been in contact with anyone who has had a positive case. 7 degrees of COVID bacon. I found at the grocery store today a bottle of pure black cherry juice. So I'm having some soda water with black cherry. Parmos doesn't want that bacon. It's good. It's not very sweet, but it is very cherry. That's good for gout. I don't ever want gout. That seems like such an unpleasant thing. I remember hearing about people when they were getting their vaccines getting like armpits swelling like lumps and things from that, and I'm like, I don't want that. Again, so far I've been pretty lucky when it comes to the shots. All 3 of them they usually like give me one bad day. But that's about it. One bad day and then like a follow-up kind of sleepy day. Lymph nodes? Yeah. I don't want problems with my lymph nodes. No, thank you. Oh, scrick. Shoulder went crick from that stretch. Yeah, it's nice to find just a pure fruit juice that's not, a mix of apple and pear and grape and sugar and whatnot. This one was like the ingredients. Black cherry juice. So that was pretty nice. And it wasn't too expensive. It was on sale for like $2 off. It was in like the natural food section at Save-On. It was still like $5 for the bottle, but it's a decent sized bottle, and that's all right. So I was they also had the same thing except pomegranate juice instead of black cherry, but I decided just to get the black cherry. But yeah, so far it's pretty tasty. Farmo says arm muscle hurts, but not as much as it sometimes does after physio. Yeah, alright, that's fair. Fair. Looks like Lily is currently streaming Phasmophobia. I'm not one for scary things myself. I don't like horror movies. I don't like scary games. Sometimes it's fun to watch somebody else play a scary game, but it's not for me. I don't go out of my way to frighten myself or have others frighten me. It's just, I don't need that. I made the lights a little more blue today. I figured Cherrick was probably a bit of a blue lighting sort of place. Farmos doesn't mind monster games, but not into jump scare games. Yeah, same. Or those games that are like designed to mess with your brain and scare you. Sometimes they can be interesting, but I'd rather just have fun. And being scared isn't fun for me. But that said, Phasmophobia does sound like a pretty interesting game, from what I have heard of it. So, Sharky's Mrs. doesn't like gore as much, but doesn't mind a jump scare or two. Farmos wants a big weapon. Blast the ghosts. Farmos says she's kind of the opposite. Doesn't mind gore as much, but doesn't like a jump scare or two. Book. Why don't we read that book, huh? Blast the ghosts. Give you a proton pack. We still need to see the new Ghostbusters movie. There's a few films we still need to see. We saw Dune, but we still need to see the new Ghostbusters. We still need to see the new Venom. I feel like there's maybe one or two others. Didn't that just come out? Didn't what just come out? Oh, Matrix. Yeah, we need to see Matrix. Didn't Ghostbusters? No, it's been out for a while. I think it came out in December. Because it was weird that it didn't come out in October. Because, October, obviously, Ghostbusters is going to come out in October for Halloween. But I think it actually came out in December. Oh, or Sharkies are saying November 1st. I suppose we could ask the internet. How about that? It is, let's see. Farmo says November 19th. Okay. And I will stop looking. So, yeah. Farmos was wrong, and it was kind of in between when the Sharkies and I were saying. And yes, Matrix came out, like, near Christmas. Was it Christmas Day? It might have been like Christmas Day. Still need to see that. December 22nd. Okay. Which, that one's weird timing. I think that was a bad... That seems like a poor choice for a release date, and I think maybe it's not doing so well, partially maybe because of that. Also because of other films that it was competing with. So it's 7:15. Let's read some book. Let's get to chapter 13. Huh? Page 171 out of 262. If I remember correctly, this chapter is only 10 pages long. The winter break crowd, maybe. Okay. So we left off with basically Garion and Barak still in the sled, just having left old Martier behind. She disappeared somewhere. And they were on their way to Anheg's palace at Val Alorn. All right. Chapter 13. The palace of King Anheg of Cherek was a vast, brooding structure near the center of Val Alorn. Huge wings, many of them crumbled into decay, with unpaned windows staring emptily at the open sky through collapsed roofs, stretched out from the main building in all directions. So far as Garion could tell, there was no plan to the palace whatsoever. It had, it seemed, merely grown over the 3,000 years and more that the kings of Cherek had ruled there. Why is so much of it empty and broken down like that? Like the Winchester Mansion? I don't know the Winchester Mansion. Why is so much of it empty and broken down like that? He asked Barak, as their sleigh whirled into the snow-packed courtyard.
What some kings build, other kings let fall down,
Barak said shortly.
It's the way of kings.
Barak's mood had been black since their encounter with the blind woman at the temple. The others had all dismounted and stood waiting. You've been away from home too long if you can get lost on the way from the harbor to the palace, Silk said pleasantly.
We were delayed,
Barak grunted. A broad, iron-bound door at the top of the wide steps that led up to the palace opened then, as if someone behind it had been waiting for them all to arrive. A woman with long, flaxen braids and wearing a deep scarlet cloak trimmed with rich fur, stepped out onto the portico at the top of the stairs and stood looking down at them. Greetings, Lord Barak, Earl of Trelheim and husband, she said formally. Barak's face grew even more somber.
Merrill,
he acknowledged with a curt nod. Sorry, it's just... In the game Metal Gear Solid, there's a character named Merrill. It's spelled slightly differently. In this book, it's Merel. And I think in that game, it's like Meryl or something. But... yeah, as Farmos was saying, that was Solid Snake. There's a part where the main characters, Solid Snake says her name a few times, and there's parts where she's like yelling and it comes out like, Merrill! Merrill! And I don't know, for me it's kind of become a joke to just say that, and I wasn't expecting my Barak to kind of sound like that when her name came up.
Merrill.
He acknowledged with a curt nod. King Anheg granted me permission to greet you, my lord, Barak's wife said, as is my right and my duty.
You've always been most attentive to your duties, Merrill,
Barak said.
Where are my daughters?
I'm not sure if I've got his voice exactly right now. At Trelheim, my lord, she said, I didn't think it would be a good idea for them to travel so far in the cold. There was a faintly malicious note in her voice. Barak sighed.
I see,
He said. Was I in error, my lord? Merrill asked.
let it pass.
Barak said. If you and your friends are ready, my lord, she said, I'll escort you to the throne room. Barak went up the stairs, briefly and rather formally embraced his wife, and the two of them went through the wide doorway. Tragic, the Earl of Selene murmured, shaking his head as they all went up the stairs to the palace door. Hardly that, Silk said. After all, Barak got what he wanted, didn't he? You're a cruel man, Prince Keldar, the Earl said. Not really, Silk said. I'm a realist, that's all. Barak spent all those years yearning after Merrill, and now he's got her. I'm delighted to see such steadfastness rewarded. Aren't you? The Earl of Selene sighed. A party of mailed warriors joined them and escorted them through a maze of corridors, up broad stairs and down narrow ones, deeper and deeper into the vast pile. I've always admired Cherek architecture, Silk said sardonically. It's so unanticipated. Expanding the palace gives weak kings something to do, King Fulrak observed. It's not a bad idea, really. In Sendaria, bad kings usually devote their time to street paving projects, but all of Val Elorn was paved thousands of years ago. Silk laughed. It's always been a problem, Your Majesty, he said. How do you keep bad kings out of mischief? Prince Keldar, King Fulrak said, I don't wish your uncle any misfortune, but I think it might be very interesting if the crown of Drasnia just happened to fall to you. Please, Your Majesty, Silk said with feigned shock, don't even suggest that. Also a wife, the Earl of Selene said slyly. The prince definitely needs a wife. That's even worse, Silk said with a shudder. The throne room of King Anheg, everyone picking on Silk. The throne room of King Anheg was a vaulted chamber with a great fire pit in the center where whole logs blazed and crackled. Unlike the lushly draped hall of King Fulrak, the stone walls here were bare. The torches flared and smoked in iron rings sunk in stone. The men who lounged near the fire were not the elegant courtiers of Fulrak's court, but rather were bearded Cherek warriors, gleaming in chainmail. At one end of the room sat 5 thrones, each surmounted by a banner. 4 of the thrones were occupied, and 3 regal-looking women stood talking nearby. Something that I find kind of interesting about Cherek is, I feel like it does come off somewhat like stereotypically Norse. You've got these big armored guys and, it's snowy and men wrestling in the streets and whatnot. But the palace and the age of Cherek does not exactly line up. Cherek is 3,000 plus years old. This palace is this huge sprawling structure that's been just built on and abandoned and built on and abandoned. It's not like a wooden longhouse sort of style thing that you might expect from something more typically Norse. So I'd say maybe it's got Norse or Nordic influences, no stave churches, but it's definitely like old and elaborate and I don't know. They've been building, so it feels maybe almost like a little bit between like Norse and like Roman mixed together in that way. Not a lot of like nothing like Norse culture with Roman architecture, maybe. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe I'm just reaching. Maybe it's just something original. How about that, huh? Nothing has, like, not everything has to be based on something else, Sleet. Jeez. All right. I get the feeling I'm going to have to improvise some new voices here and try and keep them all sorted. So, give me a little leeway for that. I don't know how many. I'm not good with the female voices. I don't know how many more female voices I'm going to be able to keep separate from each other. I don't know almost anything about Siberian culture, so I cannot corroborate that. All right. 3 regal-looking women stood talking nearby.
Fulrak, King of Sandaria!
One of the warriors who had escorted them boomed, striking the butt of his spear hollowly on the rush-strewn floor.
Hail, Fulrak!
A large, black-bearded man on one of the thrones called, rising to his feet. His long blue robe was wrinkled and spotted, and his hair was shaggy and unkempt. The gold crown he wore was dented in a place or two, and one of its points had been broken off. "Hail, Anheg!" the king of the Sendars replied, bowing slightly.
Thy throne awaits thee, my dear Fulrak,
The shaggy-haired man said, indicating the banner of Sandaria behind the one vacant throne.
The kings of Aloria welcome the wisdom of the king of Sandaria at this council.
Garion found the stilted, archaic form of address strangely impressive. "Which king is which, friend Silk?" Dernick whispered as they approached the thrones. "The fat one in the red robe with the reindeer on his banner is my uncle, Rodar of Drasnia. The lean-faced one in black under the horse banner is Chohag of Algaria. The big, grim-faced one in gray with no crown, who sits beneath the sword banner, is Brand, the Raven Warder." "Brand?" Garion interrupted, startled as he remembered the stories of the Battle of Vomimbre. "All Raven Warders are named Brand," Silk explained. Well, he was described as grim-faced. There are similarities. Maybe there aren't, actually. Now that I think about it, the only similarity might be the grimness. Because after Bard shot the dragon, he kind of became a little self-important, I think. And we'll see whether Brand is the same. King Fulrak greeted each of the other kings in the formal language that seemed to be customary, and then he took his place beneath the green banner with its golden sheaf of wheat that was the emblem of Sandaria.
Hail, Belgarath, disciple of Aldur,
Anheg said.
and hail, Lady Polgara, honored daughter of immortal Belgarath.
Did I make his voice too similar to Mr. Wolf's?
There's little...
Maybe I did. I'm gonna have to fix that.
There's little time for all this ceremony, Anheg,
Mr. Wolf said tartly, throwing back his cloak and striding forward.
Why have the kings of Eloria summoned me?
Permit us our little ceremonies, Ancient One, Rodar, the grossly fat king of Drasnia, said slyly. We so seldom have the chance to play king. We won't be much longer at it. Mr. Wolf shook his head in disgust. Firemouse says, honored daughter. Dude, she's a scary sorcerer in her own right. That's true. I think that in recorded history, Belgarath's achievements are more well-known and renowned. The whole adventures with the Orb of Aldur and things like that. I know that, like, there's definitely things that Polgara is known for, but I don't know if any of them are as, like, known in stories and things like that that are told everywhere. Sharky saying maybe they always come as a pair when as themselves. And Pharma says, still, I feel like this is Cherrick sexism. Maybe it is. Maybe it is. So you think then that if she were his son, he wouldn't be greeted as honored son of Belgarath? Maybe. I don't know.
There's little time for all this ceremony, Anheg.
Oh no, I skipped back. Go back forward. All right. Mr. Wolf shook his head in disgust. Excuse me. One of the three regal-looking women came forward then. She was a tall, raven-haired beauty in an elaborately cross-tied black velvet gown. She curtsied to King Fulrak and touched her cheek briefly to his. Your Majesty, she said, your presence honors our home. Your Highness, Fulrak replied, inclining his head respectfully. Queen Islena, Silk murmured to Dernick and Garion. Anheg's wife. The little man's nose twitched with suppressed mirth. Watch her when she greets Polgara. The queen turned and curtsied deeply to Mr. Wolf. Divine Belgarath, she said, her rich voice throbbing with respect.
Hardly divine, Islena, the old man said dryly.
Immortal son of Aldur, she swept on, ignoring the interruption. Mightiest sorcerer in all the world, my poor house trembles at the awesome power you bring within its walls.
A pretty speech, Islena, Wolf said. A little inaccurate, but pretty all the same.
But the queen had already turned to Aunt Pole. Glorious sister, she intoned. Sister? Garion was startled. She's a mystic, Silk said softly. She dabbles a bit in magic and thinks of herself as a sorceress. Watch. With an elaborate gesture, the queen produced a green jewel and presented it to Aunt Pole. She had it up her sleeve, Silk whispered gleefully. I love that. Silk was ready for it. The Sharkies say, next she'll saw Garion in half. For my next trick, can I have a volunteer from the delegation? Is this your card? Oh boy. All right. Let's see if I can go from laughing to Aunt Pole's voice. A royal gift, Islena, Aunt Pole said in a strange voice. A pity that I can only offer this in return. She handed the queen a single, deep red rose. Where did she get that? Garion asked in amazement. Silk winked at him. The queen looked at the rose doubtfully and cupped it between her two hands. She examined it closely, and her eyes widened. The color drained out of her face, and her hands began to tremble. The second queen had stepped forward. She was a tiny blonde with a beautiful smile. Without ceremony, she kissed King Fulrak and then Mr. Wolf, and embraced Aunt Pole warmly. Her affection seemed simple and unself-conscious. Poren, Queen of Drasnia, Silk said, and his voice had an odd note to it. Garion glanced at him and saw the faintest hint of a bitter, self-mocking expression flicker across his face. In that single instant, as clearly as if it had suddenly been illuminated by a bright light, Garion saw the reason for Silk's sometimes strange manner. An almost suffocating surge of sympathy welled up in his throat. The third queen, Scylla? I think Scylla sounds slightly less like Silo. So, Scylla of Algaria greeted King Fulrak, Mr. Wolf, and Aunt Pole with a few brief words in a quiet voice. Is the Revan warder unmarried? Dernick asked, looking around for another queen. He had a wife, Silk said shortly, his eyes still on Queen Poren. But she died some years ago. She left him 4 sons. Ah, Dernick said. Then Barak, grim-faced and obviously angry, entered the hall and strode to King Anheg's throne. How am I going to do King Anheg's voice? I've got to shift it a bit.
Welcome home, cousin,
King Anheg said.
I thought perhaps you'd lost your way. Family business, Anheg,
Barak said.
I had to have a few words with my wife.
I see, King Anheg said, and let it drop.
Have you met our friends?
Barak asked. Not as yet, Lord Barak, King Rodar said. We were involved with the customary formalities, he chuckled, and his great paunch jiggled.
I'm sure you all know the Earl of Selene,
Barak said.
And this is Dernick, a smith and a brave man. The boy's name is Garion. He's in Lady Polgara's care. A good lad.
Do you suppose we could get on with this? Mr. Wolf asked impatiently. Chohag, king of the Algars, spoke in a strangely soft voice. Art thou aware, Belgarath, of the misfortune which hath befallen us? We turn to thee for counsel.
Chohag,
Wolf said testily,
you sound like a bad Arendish epic. Is all this theeing and thouing really necessary?
Chohag looked embarrassed and glanced at King Anheg.
My fault, Belgarath,
Anheg said ruefully.
I set scribes to work to record our meetings. Chohag was speaking to history as well as to you.
His crown had slipped a bit and perched precariously over one ear.
History's very tolerant, Anheg, Wolf said. You don't have to try to impress her. She'll forget most of what we say anyway.
He turned to the Revan warder.
Brand, he said, do you suppose you could explain all this without too much embellishment?
I'm afraid it's my fault, Belgarath, the grey-robed warder said in a deep voice.
The apostate was able to carry off his theft because of my laxity. The thing's supposed to protect itself, Brand, Wolf told him. I can't even touch it. I know the thief, and there's no way you could have kept him out of Riva. What concerns me is how he was able to lay hands on it without being destroyed by its power.
I think this is the most we've heard about the object in question. Sharky say, better watch it if you take too much laxity. Oh dear. And Farmos is noticing that all my male voices are starting to sound the same with the graveliness. Yep. Yeah, I gotta mix them up a little bit. Brand spread his hands helplessly.
We woke one morning, and it was gone. The priests were only able to divine the name of the thief. The spirit of the bear god wouldn't say any more. Since we knew who he was, we were careful not to speak his name or the name of the thing he took. Good, Wolf said. He has ways to pick words out of the air at great distances. I taught him how to do that myself. Brand nodded. We knew that, he said. It made phrasing our message to you difficult. When you didn't come to Riva, and my messenger didn't return, I thought something had gone wrong. That's when we sent men out to find you. Mr. Wolf scratched at his beard. I guess it's my own fault that I'm here, then, he said. I borrowed your messenger. I had to get word to some people in Arendia. I suppose I should have known better. Silk cleared his throat. May I speak? He asked politely. Some sirens out there. I don't know if you can hear them. A student? Oh. I taught him to do that myself. I see. May I speak? He asked politely. Certainly, Prince Keldar, King Anheg said. Is it entirely prudent to continue these discussions in public? Silk asked. The Murgos have enough gold to buy ears in many places, and the arts of the Grolims can lift the thoughts out of the minds of the most loyal warriors. What isn't known can't be revealed, if you take my meaning. The warriors of Anheg aren't so easily bought, Silk, Barak said testily. And there aren't any Grolims in Cherek. Are you also confident about the serving men and the kitchen wenches? Silk suggested. And I've found Grolims in some very unexpected places. There's something in what my nephew says, King Rodar said, his face thoughtful. Drasnia has centuries of experience in the gathering of information, and Keldar is one of our best. If he thinks that our words might go further than we'd want them to, we might be wise to listen to him. Thank you, Uncle, Silk said, bowing. Could you penetrate this palace, Prince Keldar? King Anheg challenged. I already have, Your Majesty, Silk said modestly, 12 times or more. Anheg looked at Rodar with one raised eyebrow. Rodar coughed slightly. It was some time ago, Anheg. Nothing serious. I was just curious about something, that's all. All you had to do was ask, Anheg said in a slightly injured tone. I didn't want to bother you, Rodar said with a shrug. Besides, it's more fun to do it the other way. We're learning a little bit more about Drasnians. Friends,
King Fulrak said. The issue before us is too important to chance compromising it. Wouldn't it be better to be overcautious rather than take any risks? King Anheg frowned, and then shrugged.
Whatever you wish,
he said.
We'll continue in private, then. Cousin, would you clear old King Eldrig's hall for us and set guards in the hallways near it? I will, Anheg,
Barak said. He took a dozen warriors and left the hall. The Sharkies, I spied for your convenience. Yep. It would have been too much of a hassle to just ask you, so I sent a spy. I sent a prince who is also a spy. It's easier that way. The kings rose from their thrones, all except Chohag. A lean warrior, very nearly as tall as Barak, and with the shaved head and flowing scalp lock of the Algars, stepped forward and helped him up. Garion looked inquiringly at Silk. An illness when he was a child, Silk explained softly. It left his legs so weak that he can't stand unaided. Doesn't that make it kind of hard for him to be king? Garion asked. Algars spend more time sitting on horses than they do standing on their feet, Silk said. Once he's on a horse, Chohag's the equal of any man in Algaria. The warrior who's helping him is Hetar, his adopted son. Farmhouse says Drasnians are just really introverted. They can't ask you what's going on in person. I don't know, Silk doesn't seem that introverted to me. You know him? Garion asked. I know everyone, Garion, Silk laughed softly. Hetar and I have met a few times. I like him, though I'd rather he didn't know that. Queen Poren came over to where they stood. Islena's taking Silar and me to her private quarters, she said to Silk. Apparently, women aren't supposed to be involved in matters of state here in Cherek. Our Cherek cousins have a few blind spots, Your Highness. All right, so maybe it was Cherek sexism. Silk said. Yeah. All right. Farmos was right, everyone. I was wrong. Our Cherek cousins have a few blind spots, Your Highness, Silk said. They're arch-conservatives, of course, and it hasn't occurred to them yet that women are human. Yeesh. Queen Poren winked at him with a sly little grin. I'd hoped that we might get a chance to talk, Keldar, but it doesn't look like it now. Did you get my message to Layla? Silk nodded. She said she'd write to you immediately, he said. If we'd known you were going to be here, I could have carried her letter myself. It was Islena's idea, she said. She decided that it might be nice to have a council of queens while the kings were meeting. She'd have invited Layla too, but everyone knows how terrified she is of sea travel. Has your council produced anything momentous, Highness? Silk asked slightly. Queen Poren made a face. We sit around and watch Islena do tricks. Disappearing coins, things up her sleeves, that kind of thing. She said. Or she tells fortunes. Silar's too polite to object, and I'm the youngest, so I'm not supposed to say much. It's terribly dull, particularly when she goes into trances over that stupid crystal ball of hers. Did Layla think she could help me? I like Paren. If anyone can, Silk assured her. I should warn you, though, that her advice is likely to be quite explicit. Queen Layla's an earthy little soul, and sometimes very blunt. Queen Paren giggled wickedly. That's all right, she said. I'm a grown woman, after all. Sharkies say, you win book reading. Farmo says, you guys were right. Cards and coins. We all win book reading. Yep. Disappearing coins, things up her sleeves. Oh boy. Of course, Silk said. I just wanted to prepare you, that's all. Are you making fun of me, Keldar? She asked. Would I do that, Your Highness? Silk asked, his face full of innocence. I think you would, she said. Coming, Paren? Queen Islena asked from not far away. At once, Your Highness, the Queen of Drasnia said. Her fingers flickered briefly at Silk. What a bore. Patience, Highness, Silk gestured in reply. Queen Paren docilely followed the stately Queen of Cherek and the silent Queen of Algaria from the hall. Silk's eyes followed her, and his face had that same self-mocking expression as before. The others are leaving, Garion said delicately, and pointed to the far end of the hall, where the Alorn kings were just going out the door. All right, Silk said, and led the way quickly after them. Garion stayed at the rear of the group as they all made their way through the drafty corridors toward King Eldrig's hall. The dry voice in his mind told him that if Aunt Pole saw him, she'd probably find a reason to send him away. As he loitered along at the rear of the procession, a furtive movement flickered briefly far down one of the side corridors. He caught only one glimpse of the man, an ordinary-looking Cherek warrior wearing a dark green cloak, and then they had moved past that corridor. Garion stopped and stepped back to look again, but the man in the green cloak was gone. At the door to King Eldrig's hall, Aunt Pole stood waiting with her arms crossed. Where have you been? She asked. I was just looking, he said as innocently as possible. I see, she said. Then she turned to Barak. The council's probably going to last for a long time, she said. And Garion's just going to get restless before it's over. Is there some place where he can amuse himself until supper time? Aunt Pole, Garion protested.
The armory, perhaps?
Barak suggested. What would I do in an armory? Garion demanded. What kind of response is that? Go to the armory. Would you prefer the scullery? Aunt Pole asked pointedly. On second thought, I think I might like to see the armory. I thought you might. Sharky say Barak suggests his favorite place to play.
It's at the far end of this corridor, Garion,
Barak said.
The room with the red door.
Run along, dear, Aunt Pole said, and try not to cut yourself on anything. Garion sulked slowly down the corridor Barak had pointed out to him, keenly feeling the injustice of the situation. The guards posted in the passageway outside King Eldrig's hall even made eavesdropping impossible. Garion's grown quite comfortable with eavesdropping by this point, I feel like. Aunt Pole, I'm taking this child with me to look after him. Also Aunt Pole, there it is. Garion, go in another room and play with some knives. Pharma says, then sends him into the very pointy room. Try not to cut yourself. Go on. Excuse me. Garion sighed and continued his solitary way toward the armory. The other part of his mind was busy, however, mulling over certain problems. Pharma says eavesdropping is like his TV. Despite his stubborn refusal to accept the possibility that Mr. Wolf and Aunt Pole were indeed Belgarath and Polgara, the behavior of the Alorn kings made it obvious that they, at least, did believe it. Then there was the question of the rose Aunt Pole had given to Queen Islena. Setting aside the fact that roses do not bloom in the winter, how had Aunt Pole known that Islena would present her with that green jewel, and therefore prepared the rose in advance? He deliberately avoided the idea that his aunt had simply created the rose on the spot. The corridor along which he passed, deep in thought, was dim, with only a few torches set in rings on the walls to light the way. Side passages branched out from it here and there, gloomy, unlighted openings that stretched back into the darkness. He had almost reached the armory when he heard a faint sound in one of those dark passages. Without knowing exactly why, he drew back into one of the other openings and waited. The man in the green cloak stepped out into that lighted corridor and looked around furtively. He was an ordinary-looking man with a short, sandy beard, and he probably could have walked anywhere in the palace without attracting much notice. His manner, however, and his stealthy movements cried out louder than words that he was doing something he was not supposed to be doing. He hurried up the corridor in the direction from which Garion had come, and Garion shrank back into the protective darkness of his hiding place. When he carefully poked his head out into the corridor again, the man had disappeared, and it was impossible to know down which of those dark side passageways he had gone. Garion's inner voice told him that even if he told anyone about this, they wouldn't listen. He'd need more than just an uneasy feeling of suspicion to report if he didn't want to appear foolish. All he could do for the time being was to keep his eyes open for the man in the green cloak. That brings us to 8 o'clock and 182, chapter 14. The time being. Sharky say Garion knows sneakiness when he sees it. Well, he's been around more and more of it lately. The next chapter only goes from page 182 to 194, so 12 more pages. 182 to 194, yeah. I don't know why it looks quite short, but... what do we think? It's only, like, it's 7:59 right now. We could bust through another chapter if everyone wants to keep going, or we could stop here. I'm fine. Either way. Oh, stretch. I'm happy to keep going, or I'll acquiesce to. You up for more? Sharkies are up for more. What about Farmos? Farmos is good either way. All right. Then in that case, let's keep going. Let's go straight into chapter 14. It was snowing the following morning, and Aunt Pole, Silk, Barak, and Mr. Wolf again met for counsel with the kings, leaving Garion in Dernick's keeping. The two sat near the fire in the huge hall with the thrones, watching the 24 or so bearded Cherrick warriors who lounged about or engaged in various activities to pass the time. Some of them sharpened their swords or polished their armor. Others ate or sat drinking, even though it was still quite early in the morning. Several were engaged in a heated dice game, and some simply sat with their backs against the wall and slept. "These Cherricks seem to be very idle people," Dernick said quietly to Geryon. "I haven't seen anyone actually working since we arrived, have you?" Geryon shook his head. "I think these are the king's own warriors," he said just as quietly. "I don't think they're supposed to do anything except sit around and wait for the king to tell them to fight someone." Dernick frowned disapprovingly. "It must be a terribly boring way to live," he said. "Dernick," Geryon asked after a moment, "did you notice the way Beric and his wife acted toward each other?" "That's very sad," Dernick said. "Silk told me about it yesterday. Beric fell in love with her when they were both very young, but she was high-born and didn't take him very seriously." "How does it happen that they're married, then?" Geryon asked. "It was her family's idea," Dernick explained. "After Beric became the Earl of Trelheim, they decided that a marriage would give them a valuable connection. Merrill objected, but it didn't do her any good. Silk said that Beric found out after they were married that she's really a very shallow person, but of course it was too late by then. She does spiteful things to try to hurt him, and he spends as much time away from home as possible." "Do they have any children?" Geryon asked. "Two," Dernick said. "Both girls, about 5 and 7. Beric loves them very much, but he doesn't get to see them very often." Geryon sighed. "I wish there was something we could do," he said. "We can't interfere between a man and his wife," Dernick said. "Things like that just aren't done." "Did you know that Silk's in love with his aunt?" Geryon said without stopping to think. "Geryon!" Dernick's voice was shocked. "That's an unseemly thing to say." "It's true all the same," Geryon said defensively. "Of course, she's not really his aunt, I guess. She's his uncle's second wife. It's not exactly like she was his real aunt." "She's married to his uncle," Dernick said firmly. "Who made up this scandalous story?" "Nobody made it up," Geryon said. "I was watching his face when he talked to her yesterday. It's pretty plain the way he feels about her." "I'm sure you just imagined it," Dernick said disapprovingly. He stood up. "Let's look around. That'll give us something better to do than sit here gossiping about our friends. It's really not the sort of thing decent men do." "All right," Geryon agreed quickly, a little embarrassed. He stood up and followed Dernick across the smoky hall and out into the corridor. "Let's have a look at the kitchen," Geryon suggested. "And the smithy, too," Dernick said. I like how they're both like, these are our favorite places. The Sharkies say Geryon's more astute about relationships than any 15-year-old boy they've ever known. Geryon does seem to pick up on secrets and things, on hidden details, quite quickly. Astute is a good word for it. And I don't think it's just about relationships. There seem to be lots of things like that he notices even when others seem to miss them. The royal kitchens were enormous. Entire oxen roasted on spits, and whole flocks of geese simmered in lakes of gravy. Stews bubbled in cart-sized cauldrons, and battalions of loaves were marched into ovens big enough to stand in. Unlike Aunt Pole's well-ordered kitchen at Faldor's farm, everything here was chaos and confusion. The head cook was a huge man with a red face who screamed orders which everyone ignored. There were shouts and threats and a great deal of horseplay. A spoon, heated in a fire and left where an unsuspecting cook would pick it up, brought shrieks of mirth, and one man's hat was stolen and deliberately thrown into a seething pot of stew. Let's go someplace else, Dernick, Garion said. This isn't what I expected at all. Dernick nodded. Mistress Pole would never tolerate all this foolishness, he agreed disapprovingly. In the hallway outside the kitchen, a maid with reddish blonde hair and a pale green dress, cut quite low at the bodice, loitered. Excuse me, Dernick said to her politely. Could you direct us to the smithy? She looked him up and down boldly. Are you new here? She asked. I haven't seen you before. We're just visiting, Dernick said. Where are you from? She demanded. Sandaria, Dernick said. How interesting. Perhaps the boy could run this errand for you, and you and I could talk for a while. Her look was direct. I feel like I'm missing a message here. Firemo said honk, and then said, I love Untitled Goose Game. Did somebody else mention Untitled Goose Game? Dernick coughed, and his ears reddened. You mentioned your phrasing made me think that maybe somebody else had talked about it or something. About the game. Dernick coughed and his ears reddened. The smithy? He asked again. The maid laughed lightly. In the courtyard at the end of this corridor, she said. I'm usually around here someplace. I'm sure you can find me when you finish your business with the smith. Yes, Dernick said. I'm sure I could. Come along, Garion. Kadaji 2012, following a shoutout from Lilyfae. Hi. Is Lily still playing Phasmophobia? It says on my screen that she is, but maybe she's wrapping up. Nice to see you. We are reading Pawn of Prophecy by David Eddings. It's book 1 of the Belgariad. Yeah, that's what we do here. We read books and talk about them. And we just had one of the characters, Dernick the Smith, getting kind of boldly flirted with by a maid. They went on down the corridor and out into a snowy inner courtyard. Outrageous, Dernick said stiffly, his ears still flaming. You love this series? Oh, it's nice to have someone here who's read it before. Farmos has read it, but the Sharkies are reading along with me for the first time. I've read this series many a time. The girl has no sense of propriety whatsoever. I'd report her if I knew to whom. Shocking, Garion agreed, secretly amused by Dernick's embarrassment. They crossed the courtyard through the lightly sifting snow. The smithy was presided over by a huge, black-bearded man with forearms as big as Garion's thighs. Dernick introduced himself, and the two were soon happily talking shop to the accompaniment of the ringing blows of the smith's hammer. Garion noticed that instead of the plows, spades, and hoes that would fill a Sendarian smithy, the walls here were hung with swords, spears, and war axes. At one forge, an apprentice was hammering out arrowheads, and at another, a lean, one-eyed man was working on an evil-looking dagger. Dernick and the smith talked together for most of the remainder of the morning, while Garion wandered about the inner courtyard, watching the various workmen at their tasks. There were coopers and wheelwrights, cobblers and carpenters, saddlers and candlemakers, all busily at work to maintain the huge household of King Anheg. As he watched, Garion also kept his eyes open for the sandy, bearded man in the green cloak he'd seen the night before. It wasn't likely that the man would be here where honest work was being done, but Garion stayed alert all the same. About noon, Barak came looking for them and led them back to the great hall where Silk lounged, intently watching a dice game.
Anheg and the others want to meet privately this afternoon,
Barak said.
I've got an errand to run, and I thought you might want to go along.
That might not be a bad idea, Silk said, tearing his eyes from the game. Your cousin's warriors dice badly, and I'm tempted to try a few rolls with them. It'd probably be better if I didn't. Most men take offense at losing to strangers. Barak grinned.
I'm sure they'd be glad to let you play, Silk,
he said.
They've got just as much chance of winning as you do.
Just as the sun has as much chance of coming up in the west as in the east, Silk said. Are you that sure of your skill, friend Silk? Dernick asked. I'm sure of theirs, Silk chuckled. He jumped up. Let's go, he said. My fingers are starting to itch. Let's get them away from temptation.
Anything you say, Prince Keldar,
Barak laughed. They all put on fur cloaks and left the palace. The snow had almost stopped, and the wind was brisk. I'm a bit confused by all these names, Dernick said, as they trudged toward the central part of Val Elorn. I've been meaning to ask about it. You, friend Silk, are also Prince Keldar, and sometimes the merchant Ambar of Kotu, and Mr. Wolf is called Belgarath, and Mistress Pole is also Lady Polgara, or the Duchess of Erat. Where I come from, people usually have one name. Sharky say Dernick is all of us, confused by all these names. Names are like clothes, Dernick, Silk explained. We put on what's most suitable for the occasion. Honest men have little need to wear strange clothes or strange names. Those of us who aren't so honest, however, occasionally have to change one or the other. I don't find it amusing to hear Mistress Pole described as not being honest, Dernick said stiffly. No disrespect intended, Silk assured him. Simple definitions don't apply to Lady Polgara. And when I say that we're not honest, I mean that this business we're in sometimes requires us to conceal ourselves from people who are evil as well as devious. Farmo says it's good literary technique having a character who isn't as in the know in order to get exposition. Wow. That's quite the conversation about Silk's pants being on fire. Oh, Framos doing a food dash. Dernick looked unconvinced, but let it pass. I'll just do like this. There we go. Screen blocked.
Let's take this street,
Barak suggested.
I don't want to pass the Temple of Belar today.
Why? Garion asked.
I'm a little behind in my religious duties,
Barak said with a pained look.
And I'd rather not be reminded of it by the High Priest of Belar. His voice is very penetrating, and I don't like being called down in front of the whole city. A prudent man doesn't give either a priest or a woman the opportunity to scold him in public.
There's that Cherrick sexism again. Sharky saying Barak's a choir boy. Oh boy. The streets of Val Alorn were narrow and crooked, and the ancient stone houses were tall and narrow, with overhanging second stories. Despite the intermittent snow and the crisp wind, the streets seemed full of people, most of them garbed in fur against the chill. There was much good-humored shouting and the exchange of bawdy insults. 2 elderly and dignified men were pelting each other with snowballs in the middle of one street to the raucous encouragement of the bystanders. It's raucous, right? Raucous or raucous? I think it's raucous. I'm not sure, though. Farmo says hard K.
They're old friends,
Barak said with a broad grin.
They do this every day, all winter long. Pretty soon they'll go to an alehouse and get drunk and sing old songs together until they fall off their benches. They've been doing it for years now.
What do they do in the summer? Silk asked.
They throw rocks,
Barak said.
The drinking and singing and falling off the benches stays the same, though.
Sharky say Cherrick actually sounds kind of fun. Hard K. Not my favorite cereal. Oh boy. The snowballs I could deal with. The rocks, I'd rather not. Hello, Barak, a green-eyed young woman called from an upper window. When are you coming to see me again? Barak glanced up, and his face flushed, but he didn't answer. That lady's talking to you, Barak, Garion said. Oh boy, Garion.
I heard her,
Barak replied shortly. She seems to know you, Silk said with a sly look.
She knows everyone,
Barak said, flushing even more.
Shall we move along?
Around another corner, a group of men dressed in shaggy furs shuffled along in single file. Their gait was a kind of curious swaying from side to side, and people quickly made way for them.
Hail, Lord Barak,
their leader intoned.
Hail, Lord Barak,
the others said in unison, still swaying. Barak bowed stiffly to them.
May the arm of Belar protect thee,
the leader said.
All praise to Belar, bear god of Eloria,
the others said. Barak bowed again and stood until the procession had passed. Who were they? Dernick asked.
Bear cultists,
Barak said with distaste.
Religious fanatics.
A troublesome group, Silk explained. They have chapters in all the Alorn kingdoms. They're excellent warriors, but they're the instruments of the High Priest of Belar. They spend their time in rituals, military training, and interfering in local politics. Where's this Aloria they spoke of? Garion asked.
All around us,
Barak said with a broad gesture.
Aloria used to be all the Alorn kingdoms together. They were all one nation. The cultists want to reunite them.
That doesn't seem unreasonable, Dernick said.
Aloria was divided for a reason,
Barak said.
A certain thing had to be protected, and the division of Aloria was the best way to do that.
Was this thing so important? Dernick asked. It's the most important thing in the world, Silk said. The bear cultists tend to forget that. Only now it's been stolen, hasn't it? Garion blurted as that dry voice in his mind informed him of the connection between what Barak and Silk had just said and the sudden disruption of his own voice. It's this thing that Mr. Wolf is following. Barak glanced quickly at him.
The lad is wiser than we thought, Silk,
he said soberly. He's a clever boy, Silk agreed. And it's not hard to put it all together. His weasel face was grave. You're right, of course, Garion, he said. We don't know how yet, but somebody's managed to steal it. If Belgarath gives the word, the Alorn kings will take the world apart stone by stone to get it back. You mean war? Dernick said in a sinking voice.
There are worse things than war,
Barak said grimly.
It might be a good opportunity to dispose of the Angarax once and for all.
Let's hope that Belgarath can persuade the Alorn kings otherwise, Silk said.
The thing has to be recovered,
Barak insisted. Granted, Silk agreed. But there are other ways, and I hardly think a public street's the place to discuss our alternatives. Barak looked around quickly, his eyes narrowing. They had by then reached the harbor where the masts of the ships of Cherak rose as thickly as trees in a forest. They crossed an icy bridge over a frozen stream and came to several large yards where the skeletons of ships lay in the snow. A limping man in a leather smock came from a low stone building in the center of one of the yards and stood watching their approach.
Ho, Grendig!
Barak called.
Ho, Barak!
The man in the leather smock replied.
How does the work go?
Barak asked.
Slowly in this season, Grendig said. It's not a good time to work with wood. My artisans are fashioning the fittings and sawing the boards, but we won't be able to do much more until spring.
Barak nodded and walked over to lay his hand on the new wood of a ship prow rising out of the snow.
Grendig is building this for me,
he said, patting the prow.
She'll be the finest ship afloat. If your oarsmen are strong enough to move her, Grendig said, she'll be very big, Barak, and very heavy. Then I'll man her with big men,
Barak said, still gazing at the ribs of his ship. I've had a few encounters with bears personally. I was working on the show Colony, and I was technically like the bear safety officer for that show while we were out in the woods in I guess West Coquitlam? East Coquitlam? West Coquitlam. I don't remember. Anyways, we were out in the woods, and there was one, like, saw bears there definitely every week, almost every other day. But there was one time where we were filming, and the bears got a little too close. This one bear was just like, there was gravel road, small stream, bear. And then I'm on this side of the gravel road, standing on the roof of a truck, blasting an air horn at it and yelling at it, and because it wanted to come over and visit craft services, which would not have been a good thing. Sharky say, frankly, all of Coquitlam is full of bears. The mall parking lot gets them. Yeah, lots of bears. But yeah, that was... Luckily, it didn't come any closer than that, but it was quite close. It was maybe, I don't know, 20 feet away? 20, 25 feet, something like that. But yeah, saw lots of bears working there. And I am out of focus. Back here. Whatever. Farmer says Richmond is mostly just full of rabbits, though not as much in our area. Yeah. Yeah, you don't hear about rabbits in Richmond very much. Just do this. Slow move. I'm here. Do you want to focus? Sharkies could send some bears. I think we're good without. I think we're good without bears. Bears wouldn't do very well in Richmond, I think. It's a little too much roads and too many people. I think they're better off where they've got at least some forest and whatnot to romp through. All right. Garion heard a gleeful shout from the hillside above the shipyard and looked up quickly. Several young people were sliding down the hill on smooth planks. It was obvious that Barak and the others were going to spend most of the rest of the afternoon discussing the ship. While that might be all very interesting, Garion realized that he hadn't spoken with anyone his own age for a long time. He drifted away from the others and stood at the foot of the hill, watching. One blonde girl particularly attracted his eye. In some ways, she reminded him of Zubret, but there were some differences. Where Zubret had been petite, this girl was as big as a boy, though she was noticeably not a boy. Her laughter rang out merrily, and her cheeks were pink in the cold afternoon air as she slid down the hill with her long braids flying behind her. That looks like fun, Garion said, as her improvised sled came to rest nearby. Would you like to try? She asked, getting up and brushing the snow from her woolen dress. I don't have a sled, he told her. I might let you use mine, she said, looking at him archly, if you give me something. What would you want me to give you? He asked. We'll think of something, she said, eyeing him boldly. What's your name? Garion, he said. What an odd name. Do you come from here? No, I'm from Sandaria. A Sendar? Truly? Her blue eyes twinkled. I've never met a Sendar before. My name is Mady. Garion inclined his head slightly. Do you want to use my sled? Mady asked. I might like to try it, Garion said. I might let you, she said, for a kiss. Garion blushed furiously, and Mady laughed. Sharky say the female's flirt game is strong in Cherik. A large, red-haired boy in a long tunic slid to a stop nearby and rose with a menacing look on his face. Imagine sliding down a hill on a sled and then getting up and trying to look imposing. I feel like that's a tough entrance to make.
Mady, come away from there, he ordered.
What if I don't want to? She asked. The red-haired boy swaggered toward Garion.
What are you doing here?
He demanded. I was talking with Mady, Garion said. Who gave you permission? The red-haired boy asked. He was a bit taller than Garion and somewhat heavier. I didn't bother to ask permission, Garion said. Sharky say, "Whee! Now see here!" Yep. The red-haired boy glowered, flexing his muscles threateningly. "I can thrash you if I like," he announced. Garion realized that the redhead was feeling belligerent and that a fight was inevitable. The preliminaries, threats, insults, and the like, would probably go on for several more minutes, but the fight would take place as soon as the boy in the long tunic had worked himself up to it. Garion decided not to wait. He doubled his fist and punched the larger boy in the nose. The blow was a good one, and the redhead stumbled back and sat down heavily in the snow. He raised one hand to his nose and brought it away, bright red. "It's bleeding," he wailed accusingly. "You made my nose bleed." "It'll stop in a few minutes," Garion said. "What if it doesn't?" No. Scowl slang. Farmo says, no, a fully serious sled. He was glowering the whole way down. What if it doesn't? Nosebleeds don't last forever, Garion told him. Why did you hit me? The redhead demanded tearfully, wiping his nose. I didn't do anything to you. You were going to, Garion said. Put snow on it and don't be such a baby. It's still bleeding, the boy said. Put snow on it, Garion said again. What if it doesn't stop bleeding? Then you'll probably bleed to death, Garion said in a heartless tone. It was a trick he had learned from Aunt Pole. It worked as well on the Cherrick boy as it had on Dorune and Runderig. The redhead blinked at him, and then took a large handful of snow and held it to his nose. Are all Sendars so cruel? Mady asked. I don't know all the people in Sendaria, Garion said. Wow, Garion. He's got attitude right now. The affair hadn't turned out well at all, and regretfully he turned and started back toward the shipyard. Garion, wait, Mady said. She ran after him and caught him by the arm. You forgot my kiss, she said, threw her arms around his neck, and kissed him soundly on the lips. There, she said, and she turned and ran laughing back up the hill, her blonde braids flying behind her. Barak, Silk, and Dernick were all laughing when he returned to where they stood. Oh dear.
You were supposed to chase her,
Barak said. What for? Garion asked, flushing at their laughter.
She wanted you to catch her.
I don't understand. Barak, Silk said, I think that one of us is going to have to inform the Lady Polgara that our Garion needs some further education.
You're skilled with words, Silk, Barak said. I'm sure you ought to be the one to tell her.
Why don't we throw dice for the privilege? Silk suggested.
I've seen you throw dice before, Silk, Barak laughed.
Of course, we could simply stay here a while longer, Silk said slyly. I rather imagine that Garion's new playmate would be quite happy to complete his education, and that way we wouldn't have to bother Lady Polgara about it. Garion's ears were flaming. I'm not as stupid as all that, he said hotly. I know what you're talking about, and you don't have to say anything to Aunt Pole about it. He stamped away angrily, kicking at the snow. Ah, boy. After Barak had talked for a while longer with his shipbuilder, and the harbor had begun to darken with the approach of evening, they started back toward the palace. Geryon sulked along behind, still offended by their laughter. The clouds which had hung overhead since their arrival in Val Elorn had begun to tatter, and patches of clear sky began to appear. Here and there, single stars twinkled as evening slowly settled in the snowy streets. The soft light of candles began to glow in the windows of the houses, and the few people left in the streets hurried to get home before dark. Geryon, still loitering behind, saw two men entering a wide door beneath a crude sign depicting a cluster of grapes. One of them was the sandy-bearded man in the green cloak he had seen in the palace the night before. The other man wore a dark hood, and Geryon felt a familiar tingle of recognition. Even though he couldn't see the hooded man's face, there was no need of that. They had looked at each other too often for there to be any doubt. As always before, Geryon felt that peculiar restraint, almost like a ghostly finger touching his lips. The hooded man was Asherak, and, though the Murgo's presence here was very important, it was for some reason impossible for Geryon to speak of it. He watched the two men only for a moment, then hurried to catch up with his friends. He struggled with the compulsion that froze his tongue, and then tried another approach. "Barak," he asked, are there many Murgos in Val Elorn?"
"There aren't any Murgos in Cherek,"
Barak said.
"Angaraks aren't allowed in the kingdom on pain of death. It's our oldest law. It was laid down by old Cherek Bareshoulders himself. Why do you ask?"
"I was just wondering," Geryon said lamely. His mind shrieked with the need to tell them about Asherak, but his lips stayed frozen. That evening, when they were all seated at the long table in King Anheg's central hall, with a great feast set before them, Barak entertained them with a broadly exaggerated account of Geryon's encounter with the young people on the hillside. Oh, puppy. Oh no, puppy out of focus. I can deal with me being out of focus, but puppy, that's no good. Alright, we gotta fix this. Back to here. Alright. No, it doesn't want to do it. I'm sorry. You have to deal with a slightly blurry puppy. Alright, you all ready for this? Bow, bow, bow.
"A great blow it was,"
He said in expansive tones.
"worthy of the mightiest warrior, and truly struck upon the nose of the foe. The bright blood flew, and the enemy was dismayed and overcome. Like a hero, Geryon stood over the vanquished, and, like a true hero, did not boast nor taunt his fallen opponent, but offered instead advice for quelling that crimson flood. With simple dignity, then, he quit the field, but the bright-eyed maid would not let him depart unrewarded for his valor. Hastily she pursued him, and fondly clasped her snowy arms about his neck. And there she lovingly bestowed that single kiss that is the true hero's greatest reward. Her eyes flamed with admiration, and her chaste bosom heaved with newly wakened passion. But modest Geryon innocently departed, and tarried not to claim those other sweet rewards the gentle maid's fond demeanor so clearly offered. And thus the adventure ended with our hero tasting victory, but tenderly declining victory's true compensation."
The warriors and kings at the long table roared with laughter, and pounded the table and their knees, and each other's backs in their glee. That's right. The kings of four nations. We got, yeah, four different, well, three kings and the Raven Warder, apparently. Oh, poor Garion. Queen Islena and Queen Silar smiled tolerantly, and Queen Perrin laughed openly. Lady Merrill, however, remained stony-faced, her expression faintly contemptuous as she looked at her husband. Farmo says all of everybody heard. Garion sat with his face aflame, his ears besieged with shouted suggestions and advice. Is that really the way it happened, nephew? King Rodar demanded of Silk, wiping tears from his eyes. More or less, Silk replied. Lord Barak's telling was masterly, though a good deal embellished. We should send for a minstrel, the Earl of Selene said. This exploit should be immortalized in song. Don't tease him, Queen Perrin said, looking sympathetically at Garion. Aunt Pole did not seem amused. Her eyes were cold as she looked at Barak. Isn't it odd that 3 grown men can't keep one boy out of trouble? She asked with a raised eyebrow. It was only 1 blow, my lady, Silk protested, and only 1 kiss, after all. Really, she said. And what's it going to be next time? A duel with swords, perhaps? And even greater foolishness afterward? There was no real harm in it, Mistress Pole, Dernick assured her. Aunt Pole shook her head. I thought you, at least, had good sense, Dernick, she said, but now I see that I was wrong. Garion suddenly resented her remarks. It seemed that no matter what he did, she was ready to take it in the worst possible light. His resentment flared to the verge of open rebellion. What right had she to say anything about what he did? There was no tie between them, after all, and he could do anything he wanted without her permission if he felt like it. He glared at her in sullen anger. She caught the look and returned it with a cool expression that seemed almost to challenge him. Well? She asked. Nothing, he said shortly. And that's chapter 14. Page 194. Chapter 15 will start on Friday at 7 p.m. Pacific. So we got through 2 chapters tonight. Yeah, that's right. There's Dernick actually got chastised by Aunt Pole. Whew. My throat got a little rattly there at the end, my voice. Sharky say, worth it. That last one was a good one. You enjoyed that? Garion's adventure with the other kids. Punching a kid in the face. A young man in the face. Getting a kiss. A little bit of suspicious activity taking place. The man in the green cloak. And Asherak reappearing again. Farmo says, Puppy has decided my hands require a thorough cleaning. So, what do y'all think? Send help. Yeah, I'm getting a little hungry, so I'm going to have to go help pretty soon. And it is 8:45, a slightly longer stream. A little more reading than usual, but we're getting close. What did I say? 194 out of 262. Looks like maybe about a quarter of the book left. Something like that. Oh no, Farmos's hand's getting licked away to nothing. And of course I showed the book, so now I'm out of focus again. Back here. Back here. Whatever, I don't have the patience for it right now. So anything stand out? Anything in particular people really liked about those chapters? I guess there was we got a lot of information and a lot of, I think, Cherrick culture. I think that part 2 is sounding quite like it's being told a bit differently from part 1. Cherrick is a very different place than Sandaria. Murgos aren't allowed in Cherrick at all in the entire kingdom. That's different. And it seems like it's interesting. Silk described Cherricks as being like arch conservatives. I guess in the way they treat women, and maybe in their religion, who knows? But it seems like in their daily lives they don't hold back very much. They're noisy and loud and rambunctious. Borgarian being the only young person. Yeah, he is definitely the only sort of teen in the whole group. Everyone else that is traveling and in these meetings is all much older. Sharky's like how clever Garion is proving to be while still being powerless. I feel like a lot of teen protagonists you're used to are Mary or Gary Sues. He's not good at everything. And there are problems. There's this whole mental link problem with Asherak that he has yet to... There was a moment where there was a weakness in that, but it seems to have been reestablished or re-strengthened. And he is learning as he goes, and that's something that I think is interesting. Like you said, he's not really a Mary or Gary Sue or Stu in that, but he's learning as he goes, and he is sort of, we're kind of seeing him develop as a person, and there'll be more of that as the books go on, for sure. But yeah, even you can see him becoming more practical, and that was a good example of it in that little fisticuff match there where, he knocked the kid down and then, okay, put snow on it. It's fine, it's just a nosebleed. What if it doesn't stop bleeding? Well, then you'll probably die. He is being forced by circumstance to grow up somewhat quickly, I suppose. Irma says he's picked up the sign language, yeah. But it does seem like I think most of the stuff where, like Queen Paren and Silk signing to each other there, I think we got that bit of exchange because Garion was able to understand it. So yeah, he's at least proficient enough at this point to carry on conversations and also read when other people are speaking. Yeah. Varmos says he does also have all of these talented adults who are willing to teach him, which a lot of teens don't have the luxury of. Yes, he is surrounded by a large variety of people who are all very good at something. And they don't all have things to occupy every moment of their time, and they are willing to spend some of that time with him. I don't think there's really anyone in their core traveling group so far that he has not spent much time with. It's been a while since he's had much time with Mr. Wolf. They've just had like a little conversation or two. And he hasn't been talking as much with Aunt Pole recently. But he has spent time with Dernick and Silk and Barak, each individually at some point or another. Yeah. But, like I said, my voice is getting a little rattly, and I am also getting a bit hungry. So let's see. It says Lily is still streaming, so I'm going to start a raid back to Lily. So if anybody wants to go over and say hi to Lily before you log off for the night. I'm sure she would appreciate that. So, yeah, stop in, say hi to Lily. I start raid. I hope everyone had fun with this, and we'll see you on Friday night, 7 p.m. Be here or be, just show up. Okay, bye. See you then.